Welcome to the Wargamers Guide to D&D. I'm Laura, the Blushing Noise Marine, and I'm here to talk about ways to make your combat more interesting in D&D, find narrative moments, and overall make the experience for everyone at the table better. I'm really glad you can join me on this journey. For our first episode, we're digging right into Tavern combat. It's a classic Dragonlance as a setting, literally starts in a tavern. There's nothing more D&D than stopping at a roadside tavern, going to an inn in your first city, and there's a lot of ways that we can, maybe add a little bit of combat to that. So I'm going to be exploring some different ways that you can spice it up, and also as a dungeon master, give yourself some tools to adapt to what's going on around you. So to get started, showing off our combat system, I'm going old school with this, basically putting it on a graph paper equivalent. I really think it's kind of an interesting way to position this because it takes out maybe some of the graphical elements of it and gets into the nitty-gritty of what's actually going on. So to set our scene, we've got a pretty basic tavern, it's a square. We've got a little fireplace off to the side. You can see here in kind of the lighter orange, we have the bar, we have a little bit of a wall here, an entryway over here, a staircase that leads into a basement potentially, we're not sure, and then we have a few bar staff, we've got just neutral patrons, and the kind of setup for this I have in the back of my mind is our adventurers have been sent on a quest to track down some bandits. So we have our party down here, we have our fighter in red, a paladin in yellow, a rogue in gray, a wizard in purple. Just a bit of a kind of generic party setup. So we've got two beefier characters, two more damage dealing, skill based characters. As I go through these different videos, I'll obviously have different setups, but I wanted to kind of go with something fairly basic. We've got a party of 4. So this is sort of our setup. This is our beginning scene. So from this point, it's really up to the players as to what they're going to do next. Now, I'm a bit of a fan of creating consequences. So when we look at the kind of likely scenario, the players, they rush in. They see the bandits, they immediately jump into action to try and subdue them. So how do we add depth to this combat scenario? Because realistically, the fighter within a turn is going to be basically on top of bandits here. The paladin is already in the fray. The rogue has run away to maybe set up something from behind, and the wizard has moved into a safer position where hopefully they can't be attacked immediately. So pretty, tactically sound approach for the party to take. So we can add a little bit of dimension to this by making some of the patrons of the bar also bandits. So the crowd is hostile. This immediately changes the scenario for the players. Now, these don't have to be particularly tough bandits. They can be very low level. They can be a very low CR. They don't need to be a gigantic threat, but adding more bodies adds more difficulty. Because as we can see, we can very quickly lock down the wizard. We can deny the fighter from getting into a flanking position. And now the rogue is left to potentially come in to flank, but runs the risk of probably getting taken out. If we're talking about a level 2, even a level 3 party, it doesn't take a lot of attacks to take down a rogue or a wizard. And we've also now diverted the attention of the fighter and the paladin towards saving the wizard. So we've now added a degree of complexity to this situation. Your players have to make choices. And yes, the fighter and the paladin are probably going to just beat through those bandits in a few turns. The rogue can probably pull out a ranged weapon and contribute, and the wizard is very likely going to get downed. But it adds a forced decision making to this scenario. We can also change it. So the players rush in, And we find out because they didn't ask any questions, they didn't try and gather any information, they just rushed in, they saw their target, and they jumped. Maybe this particular bartender is a retired adventurer, and seeing what's going on, immediately leaps into action and takes the wizard as a hostage. So we can very quickly change the dynamic of this encounter, and basically present a, get out of my bar scenario or get hurt. It then changes it from a tavern setting to maybe a diplomatic one where they have to, rather than brawl their way out, they have to explain to the bartender what they're doing, who the bandits are, and hopefully get them on their side. So you change it into more of a charisma-based encounter. You can, maybe it ends up being they get thrown out in front of the tavern. It can turn into a bit of a tracking situation where the bandits kind of run off and they have to go chase them down. Again, you're just sort of changing the dynamic, and you're changing your players' ideas as to what this can look like by introducing kind of a more powerful character. Now, they could also go like, well, you're a retired adventurer, team up with the bandits and try and see what's in the basement. So it can go in multiple different directions depending on what the alignment of the party is, what they're trying to go for, and ultimately what they want to get out of the scenario. So you just opening up different narrative avenues. Maybe the party doesn't want to deal with this diplomatically, and they're willing to, sacrifice themselves and, see what they can get out of it. Maybe they get some good loot. As the dungeon master, I would reward them if they do manage to take down the bartender, but I would make them a formidable opponent. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, say the players investigate. We've got the paladin moving up to, talk to the bartender. We've got the rogue mingling with other patrons, not necessarily the bandits. Maybe they don't know that they're the bandits yet. Maybe they're trying to discern who is the bandits. You as the dungeon master does know, but they don't. So they're trying to piece together what's going on. They're talking to, the server at the table. They're just trying to get a lay of the land. They're listening to the conversations around them. So how do we add complexity to this? Their goal is to get these 4 bandits in custody. It's up to you whether or not it's a dead or alive situation, but, they're criminals. They're not, mass murderers necessarily. So maybe this was actually the bandit hideout. Maybe they tracked them down, they followed them in, and didn't realize that, yes, the bar is basically a front for the bandits. We've got a bandit leader comes out of the basement. We find out that the serving staff, the bar staff, are actually working with the bandits. Maybe the guard from out front comes in to block the door, and now they're trapped. So again, this is probably not going to be as much of a diplomatic situation because they've already kind of like screwed the pooch. But it does give us maybe a more interesting combat encounter because we have more bodies, but we also now have a bit of a mini boss in the form of the bandit leader. The party's also now more out of position. So anytime you can kind of break up the party, because again, we have a rogue that's vulnerable, we have the wizard that has a fighter there, but the paladin's very out of position. So you've got 2 party members that don't have a lot of backup, and it's also in a situation where, if you've said that there's these neutral patrons, they don't know how many more of them are bandits. Maybe some of them have been told to hold back and only jump out once, things aren't going the side of the bandits. So with that, we can quickly see, in this scenario, if the players are asking too many questions, kind of in the back of my mind, I'm thinking maybe one of the servers gives a hand signal to the bartender who then, has a special stomp they do that's alerted them. So in this case, the bandits sort of take the initiative. They have the surprise round. So, these patrons are probably fairly used to this. They shuffle to the sides. The party ends up getting surrounded. Again, the server comes in to go for the wizard. The rogue ends up getting surrounded over here. The paladin is locked in combat with the bandit leader. There is a bar here so they can jump over if they need to. And then in this case, we actually have 2 bandits who are fairly exposed to the paladin, but are hidden behind a wall so they have some cover. They can jump out if they need to, say, shoot some ranged weapons. Again, we're just adding a little bit of context, a little bit of texture to the combat, rather than just having everyone run in a straight line. So this just allows us to change the tone of it a little bit. This puts the players on the back foot. Again, these bandits don't have to be particularly tough. They don't even have to be a particularly large threat. Maybe the bandit leader should be. They should be someone that could potentially down a player character or two. But these types of tavern brawls aren't usually designed to be big stat block checking, combats. They're meant to just add a little bit of flavor to the situation. So we're using combat more to build a bit of a narrative and to build a bit of a story. You realistically want this to work itself out in a fairly short amount of time in your session, but it allows you to play along with what the players are doing. The other option, and this would be sort of the good option, we'll say. So in this situation, the paladin has jumped up onto the bar, is yelling at the patrons and inspiring them to surround the bandits. The rogue's got a weapon out. The wizard has a spell readied. The fighter might also have a weapon out. The paladin is standing there, goading the crowd on to basically apprehend these bandits. Maybe they've been tormenting this town or roadside inn for a while, and the people just didn't have the support they felt they needed to overcome the challenges of dealing with the bandits. So with a little bit of extra support, a little bit of extra help from the player characters, they're able to sort of rise up, and this might end up leading into tracking down a bandit camp or a bandit fort, and dismantling the entire organization. Maybe it leads into questioning some of these bandits to find out more information, and it can lead into, again, one of those more tracking situations. But this would sort of be the players have put in the work, they've come in, they've listened to the rumors, and they can hear the grumbles from maybe this table over here that those ne'er-do-wells across the room just won't leave them alone, and they can barely feed their kids because of the protection racket they've got running. Whatever kind of makes the most sense for your setting. So this is sort of the nice ending to this, because again, you've apprehended them. You can turn them over to whatever organization had created the wanted poster or sent them on the quest in the first place. Maybe even the townspeople will help. Maybe they've got some kind of jail set aside that they can keep them in while you track down the rest of the group, and they'll handle those details. Again, you be the dungeon master for your group that you need to be. But this is just a few different ways of taking from, what is realistically a tavern situation. It's a time for role-playing. It's a time for chatting. And if you want to add in a little bit of combat, because maybe it's been a more, our role-playing heavy session, you want to add in a little bit of combat just to kind of move the story along. These are some ideas where you can kind of spice it up rather than just having, some patron just tells off the fighter who gets into a drunken fight, and, the players very quickly, take them down and, move on with their day. We can add a little bit of suspense. We can add a little bit of fear, especially, with this scenario. Even they've done everything right, but it can still turn out wrong. And, if we look at how that adds a bit of interest, that's probably going to inspire your players to maybe take issue with this particular bandit organization. They've done everything they think they should have done right, and it still turns out poorly. So then, they become a bit of an antagonist, so it can lead into more. Realistically, the goal of a D&D session is for your players to have fun. So this has been just a first quick episode of the Wargamers Guide to D&D. I'm going to be putting out more of these videos. I really appreciate you watching. I hope you'll subscribe and you can check out some of the other things I do. I'm on Instagram at Blushing Noise Marine, and if you're interested in more of what I do, you can check out the Chaos Divided Warhammer 40k podcast. My goal with these is to give a bit of a counter narrative to some of the D&D content out there. I'm a big fan of improvisation. I'm a big fan of having tools in your toolbox as a dungeon master and as a player to build interesting stories. Not necessarily perfectly well planned out written stories. I like the unknown. I like knowing that you can't know everything. So what I'm going to be putting out with this is a bit of my experience from that space, and I really appreciate you taking the time to watch, and I'll see you next time.